Welcome to this presentation of the highlights of the California propositions that will appear to voters on the ballots on November 6th. I'm Randy Swissley, a member of the League of Women Voters of Placer County and the presenter for this review. This forum is being co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Sacramento County and the Sacramento Metropolitan Cable Television Commission. It's being viewed by an audience in the Sacramento County Board of Supervisors chambers and by a live cable television audience at home. It's also being taped for rebroadcast on Metro Cable TV. The League of Women Voters is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization of women and men established to promote informed, active participation in government. The League does not support or oppose or evaluate political candidates or parties. Although our nonpartisan policy does not permit endorsement of a political candidate, we do, after careful study, take position on political issues. And now we're ready to begin our discussion of the 10 initiatives and one referendum that are on the state ballot. Since Propositions 30 and 38 conflict, I will review those two first, and then I will review the rest in order. Proposition 30, temporary taxes to fund education, guaranteed local public safety funding. This is an initiative, constitutional amendment, and statute. In preparing for this year's budget, state lawmakers could not cover the costs of programs with estimated revenue. To create additional revenue, lawmakers passed this year's budget with a plan of asking voters to approve temporary tax increases. That plan is Proposition 30. If voters do not approve Proposition 30, then the budget has required trigger cuts of $6 billion, mainly to kindergarten through high school education, community colleges, and public universities. What Proposition 30 would do if it passes is make temporary increases in sales tax and personal income tax, mainly to pay for education. The sales tax would go up by 1/4 cent for 4 years. For 7 years, there would be higher income taxes on people earning over $250,000 per year and couples filing jointly with over $500,000 per year. Kindergarten through high school and community colleges would receive most of the revenue from these increases, with the rest going to help balance the state budget. Proposition 30 would also require the state to continue to fund local public safety programs that were transferred to local government last year. Every year for the next 5 years, these temporary increases would add an estimated $6 billion to the state general fund. There would also be some smaller amounts of additional revenue available for other budget years. And in the current budget year, the planned cuts to education would not go into effect. People for Proposition 30 say the taxes are temporary, balanced, and necessary for our state students, and that Proposition 30 is the only initiative which protects schools and safety funding and addresses the state's unending budget mess. People against Proposition 30 say it has no assurances that tax increases will actually benefit classrooms and that politicians and special interests want to continue their out-of-control spending but not make meaningful reforms. Another measure on the ballot, Proposition 38, would increase personal income tax rates, but in a different way than Proposition 30. Proposition 38, tax to fund education and early childhood programs, an initiative statute. Under California's personal income tax system, people with higher incomes pay a bigger percentage of tax on their income. State income tax rates range from 1% up to 9.3% for the highest income tax bracket. Personal income taxes are the largest source of revenue for the state's general fund, which provides most of California's public school funding. What Proposition 38 would do, if it passes, is increase personal income tax rates on all but the lowest income tax bracket. Tax rates would increase by 0.4% to 2.2%, depending on income tax bracket. The highest income tax bracket would be 11.5%. This tax increase would end in 2024. Initially, 60% of the increased revenues would go to schools, 10% would go to early childhood programs, and 30% to state debt payments. For the first 4 years, a higher share would be used for state debt payments, and after that, roughly 85% of the funds would go to schools and roughly 15% would go to early childhood programs. Proposition 38 would generate about $10 billion every year. In the first few years, school districts would receive about $6 billion per year, and early childhood programs would receive about $1 billion per year, mainly for childcare and preschool. Until mid-2017, the remaining $3 billion would be used to make payments on the state's debt. People for Proposition 38 say it makes schools a priority again by guaranteeing to restore education funding, and that early childhood education is very underfunded, and Prop 38 helps more students get the start they need to succeed. People against Proposition 38 say taxpayers would be locked into higher taxes until 2024 with very little accountability as to how the money is spent. And they say that under Proposition 38, there are no requirements to improve school performance or to get rid of bad teachers. Both Proposition 30 and Proposition 38 would increase personal income tax rates, but in different ways. When sections of two ballot measures conflict like this, and the voters approve both of them, the state constitution says that the measure that gets more yes votes will be the one that will go into effect. If voters approve both Proposition 30 and Proposition 38, the courts may need to get involved to decide what sections of those measures go into effect. Proposition 31, state budget, state and local government, initiative, constitutional amendment, and statute. Every year, state lawmakers and the governor approve a budget for the general fund that has to balance planned spending with expected revenue. When they pass laws during the year, they do not have to say where the money to pay for any of those new costs will come from. If Proposition 31 passes, the state would plan and approve a budget every 2 years instead of every year. Lawmakers would have to find a way to pay for any new law that would call for more than $25 million per year in either spending or tax cuts. In financial emergencies, the governor would have greater power to cut spending to balance the budget. Local governments, including counties, cities, school districts, community college districts, and special districts, would set up new ways of coordinating to provide services, and Proposition 31 would transfer some money from the state for that purpose. Transferring state funds for local government collaborations would decrease state revenues and increase local revenues, probably about $200 million every year. It's hard to predict the combined effects of the other portions of Proposition 31. People for Proposition 31 say it requires a balanced budget and stops billions of dollars from being spent without public review, and that Proposition 31 encourages more collaboration and creative problem solving by local governments. People against Proposition 31 say that it may mean well, but it gives the governor too much power and has many complicated provisions that will end up in court. They also say that Proposition 31 could let local governments undo important environmental regulations and other state rules. Proposition 32, political contributions by payroll deduction, contributions to candidates, initiative statute. Many unions use funds they obtain from payroll deductions for political purposes. This includes contributions to campaigns for candidates, campaigns for ballot measures, or independent expenditures not directly coordinated with a campaign for a candidate or a ballot measure. Other than unions, not many corporations or other organizations obtain funds from payroll deductions to use for political purposes. What Proposition 32 would do, if it passes, is prohibit any corporation, labor union, government contractor, or government employer from using payroll deductions for political purposes. Proposition 32 would also prohibit any government contractor, including public sector labor unions, from making contributions to elected officials who play a role in awarding a contract to that contractor. The cost to the state to investigate possible violations of the law and to respond to requests for advice is estimated to possibly exceed $1 million. People for Proposition 32 say it prohibits money from being deducted from employees' paychecks for political purposes without their permission, and that it stops special interest groups from influencing politicians with contributions. People against Proposition 32 say that 99% of California corporations don't use payroll deductions for political contributions, so Proposition 32 is aimed at limiting unions. They also say that Proposition 32 does nothing to stop corporate super political action committees and independent expenditure committees. Proposition 33, auto insurance companies, prices based on drivers' history of insurance coverage, initiative statute. In California, the price of car insurance is based on three main factors: a driver's safety record, the number of miles driven each year, and the number of years a person has been driving. Insurance companies are not allowed to use drivers' history of insurance coverage as a factor for setting prices. What Proposition 33 would do if it passes is allow insurance companies to include a driver's history of insurance coverage as a factor in setting their prices. Insurance companies would be allowed to give discounts to new customers who had a history of continued coverage with their former insurer. Insurance companies would also be allowed to increase prices for new customers who did not have continuous coverage. There would probably be no major effect on the state's income or expenses for this law. People for Proposition 33 say it will make it easier for drivers to shop for better insurance rates without losing their loyalty discounts for continuous coverage when switching companies. They also say it will increase competition between insurance companies, resulting in better insurance prices for all drivers. People against Proposition 33 say it allows insurance companies to increase the price of insurance to drivers who have not had continuous coverage, and that drivers with perfect driving records would pay unfair penalties if they had not had continuous coverage. Proposition 34, the death penalty, an initiative statute. In California, some murder convictions can get sentences of either death or life imprisonment with no chance of parole. Most death penalty cases last for decades. Prisoners on death row have much higher court and prison costs than people serving life sentences. Since 1978, when the death penalty was reinstated in California, 900 individuals have received death sentences. Only 14 of them have been executed. What Proposition 34 would do if it passes is end the death penalty and make life imprisonment with no chance of parole the maximum punishment for murder. This change would apply to prisoners currently on death row. Proposition 34 would also set up a new Safe California Fund, providing a total of $100 million over the next 4 years to local law enforcement agencies to make faster progress on open murder and rape cases. The state and counties would save about $130 million each year from court activity and lower prison costs. The state would spend a total of $100 million over 4 years on the Safe California Fund. People for Proposition 34 say that evidence shows that more than 100 innocent people have been sentenced to death in the United States, and some have been executed. And they say that California will save hundreds of millions of dollars. The people against Proposition 34 say it lets murderers who commit vicious crimes escape justice, and that it takes money from the general fund to pay for a program that we don't need. Proposition 35, human trafficking, penalties, initiative statute. State law defines human trafficking as forcing or misleading people into labor or sex acts for sale. Under state law, trafficking is punishable with up to 5 years in prison or up to 8 years if the victim is under age 18. If the victim suffers great injury, up to 6 more years can be added to the prison sentence. What Proposition 35 would do if it passes is expand the definition of trafficking to include crimes related to distributing obscene materials depicting children. Proposition 35 would also increase trafficking prison sentences up to 15 years to life and trafficking fines up to $1.5 million. Fines collected would go to services for victims and to law enforcement. Under Proposition 35, all sex offenders would have to provide information about their internet activity. State and local costs could increase by $2 million every year with the increase in criminal justice activity. Higher fines could bring a few $1,000,000 every year, which could be spent on helping victims and on law enforcement. Collectively, local governments could need to spend a few $1,000,000 on training for police officers on a one-time basis. People for Proposition 35 say that we need stronger laws to stop human traffickers and online predators from harming vulnerable individuals, and that we need to identify victims, protect their rights, and help them get necessary services. People against Proposition 35 say in trying to protect us from sex offenders, Proposition 35 goes too far in intruding on our privacy rights, and that it's badly drafted and it might spend state money without reducing human trafficking. Proposition 36, Three Strikes Law, Repeat Felony Offenders, Penalties, an initiative statute. In 1994, California voters adopted a Three Strikes Law that defines strict sentencing for a person's third felony conviction. If a person has 2 violent or serious felony convictions, the sentence for any third conviction, even if the third felony is not violent or serious, is life imprisonment with a minimum of 25 years before the possibility of parole. What Prop 36 would do if it passes is reduce the sentencing for some third, nonviolent, non-serious felony convictions. Instead of life imprisonment with a minimum of 25 years before the possibility of parole, the sentence would be twice the usual prison term for that felony. Prop 36 would also allow those previously sentenced for a third nonviolent, non-serious felony to apply for resentencing. Savings to the state could be between $70 and $90 million every year because fewer people would be in prison for life, and some current inmates would get sentence reductions. The cost of court activities for resentencing could be a few $1,000,000 in the first few years. People for Proposition 36 say it would make the punishment better fit the crime, and it would save money and resources for schools and law enforcement instead of wasting it on life sentences for nonviolent offenders. People against Proposition 36 say it would allow the release from prison of dangerous repeat criminals previously sentenced to life terms, and that the Three Strikes Law has reduced the state's crime rate and prevented criminals from being recycled through our courts over and over again. Proposition 36, Genetically Engineered Foods Labeling Initiative Statute. Genetic engineering is a process of changing plant or animal DNA so they behave differently. For example, common genetically engineered foods are corn or soybeans that have been changed to resist pests or to tolerate pesticides. It's estimated that between 40% and 70% of the food sold in California may contain genetically engineered ingredients. No current law specifically regulates genetically engineered foods or requires identification of genetically engineered food. What Proposition 37 would do if it passes is require food sold in California stores to have labels that say if it's made from genetically engineered plants or animals. The law would not apply to food served in restaurants or alcohol or organic food that's already regulated. It could cost the state a few $100,000 or up to $1 million per year to make sure food suppliers follow these new labeling requirements. People for Proposition 37 say consumers will be able to make more informed decisions about what they eat, and that genetically engineered plants and animals create risks to our health and environment. People against Proposition 37 say it requires costly monitoring of foods and would open the door to unnecessary lawsuits. They say food producers will have to make changes in packaging and/or ingredients, which could make food more expensive. Proposition 39, tax treatment for multi-state businesses. Clean energy and energy efficiency funding. This is an initiative statute. A multi-state business is one that operates both in California and in other states or other countries. The majority of California's corporate income taxes come from multi-state businesses. Current law gives these businesses a choice about which way they calculate how much tax they owe to the state. They can pay taxes based on the percentage of their total sales that are in California, or they can also choose to pay taxes according to a formula that looks at employees and property out of the state, which may make their taxes lower. What Proposition 39 would do if it passes is require multi-state businesses to pay state income taxes based on the percentage of their total sales in California. For the first 5 years, half of the increased money coming into the state would be dedicated to the projects that create energy efficiency and clean energy jobs. Proposition 39 would increase state income from taxes by about $1 billion per year. A large part of that money would be spent on schools. For the first 5 years, the state would spend about $550 million per year on energy efficiency and alternative energy projects. People for Proposition 39 say it ensures that large corporations pay their fair share at a time when there have been drastic California budget cuts, and that Proposition 39 will fund energy efficiency projects, create jobs, and help fund schools. People against Proposition 39 say this $1 billion tax increase will make businesses cut thousands of jobs in California, and that energy efficiency projects are already well funded. Proposition 40, redistricting state Senate districts, and this is a referendum. Each state lawmaker represents people who live in a specific district. Every 10 years after the U.S. Census, the Citizens Redistricting Commission adjusts the maps for these districts to make sure that each district has about the same number of people. This process is called redistricting. The law says that these district maps can be challenged by a referendum, requiring voters to approve them. Enough signatures were gathered in a referendum process to challenge the current district maps for the state senators. What Proposition 40 would do if it passes is approve the current state Senate district maps created and certified in 2011. A no vote would reject the current maps, and court-appointed officials would be required to set temporary boundaries for use in future elections. Either way, there's no effect on the district boundaries for state assembly, Board of Equalization, or representatives in Congress. If voters approve the current state Senate district maps with a majority yes vote on Proposition 40, there would be no effect on the state or local government budgets. If voters reject the current state Senate district maps with a majority no vote on Proposition 40, it would cost the state about $500,000 to redraw new district maps, and it would also cost all of the counties $500,000 to develop new election materials, for a total cost to the taxpayer of $1 million. People for Proposition 40 say a yes vote keeps the current districts and upholds the will of the people in creating the Citizens Redistricting Commission. People against Proposition 40 have stopped campaigning and are no longer asking for a no vote. Thank you for viewing this forum. We hope that the insights you have gained from this forum will aid you in making your decision about how to cast your vote. For more information, please visit our Smart Voter website at www.smartvoter.org or the League of Women Voters of Sacramento County website at www.lwvsacramento.org. Also, for the schedule and rebroadcast of this forum, visit www.sacmetrocable.tv. And please vote by November 6th to help make our democracy work. Thank you.